Hoist your britches and batten your hatches. It's time for another scintillating Captain Bob review from iPadBoardGames.org.
Ah, the 60s. The 1860s. A simpler time when Woodstock was just your supply of fireplace logs, hippies were a pelvic inflammation caused by lack of vitamin E, and wars were less divisive and more civil. Can the modern conveyance of the iPad recapture the glory days, or will the endeavor be stonewalled? Let's find out as we take a gander at Civil War 1863. This game straddles the line between board and war game. A meat space version would require far more charts and modifier tables than Risk, but far less than Advanced Squad Leader. Fortunately, the computer handles all of the bean counting for you, thus making war enjoyable for those of us who aren't amateur tax accountants. Upon starting a new game, you are given your choice of which side you'd like to fight for. Go with the Union Army if you'd like to fight alongside such Yankee legends as U.S. Grant, Tecumseh Sherman, or Derek Jeter. Or sidle up to the Confederacy if you're with General Robert E. Lee, Lieutenant John Pemberton, or Colonel Sanders. After declaring your allegiance, you get to choose between the 4 included campaigns, plus another 6 if you want to shell out the money for them. Each campaign consists of 5 to 8 individual missions. Oftentimes playing as the Union or the Confederacy makes no difference, as the mission is exactly the same for both sides, only the colors of your uniforms and the design of your flag will be different. For other missions, you will become the de facto attacker or defender based on your choice. Each mission has a number of objectives that decide your success or failure. Usually it's things like capture 2 control points, win before turn 15, or the always reliable kill everybody. With only those commands, it is now up to you to save the sanctity of the USA! Or CSA if you're playing the South. The game is played on a hex board with varying terrain, roads, and buildings, all of which have varying effects on units' movement, combat, and lines of sight. Deciphering which terrain is which can be a little tricky in the fully rendered pseudo 3D perspective view. Luckily, the game allows you to zoom out just a little, which automatically switches everything to a simplified 2D, more board gamey look. By touching one of your units, all of the hexes it can move to and or attack are highlighted. Touch a highlighted hex and your unit moves there or attacks there. Touching a highlighted enemy brings up displays of all the modifiers that will be calculated in the attack, and you can check your odds against multiple targets before deciding who to drown in a hail of hot lead. Once you've moved all your units you wish to move this turn, a tap of the next player button sets the computer-controlled units into action, or tells you to hand the iPad over to your opponent in a pass-and-play mode. Whoever said war is hell obviously never played this game, as the controls are easier than my television remote.
All right, you lovers, all hands on deck as the captain talks about the game's implementation.
At ease, Timmy. Once you get past the math of range, terrain, and morale modifiers, and given that this is an iPad game, you are instantaneously past those, Civil War 1863 is a simple game. You have exactly 4 unit types available to you: generals, cavalry, dismounted cavalry, and artillery. While this may be historically accurate to the fighting forces of the time, it makes for a kind of blasé game experience. Units can be slightly differentiated by their status as raw, veteran, or elite, but all that amounts to are differing pluses or minuses on their combat modifiers. Frustratingly, you are never given any sort of choice regarding which units you will bring to the mission, nor their starting positions on the map. When the mission starts, your units are there, take them or leave them, and leaving them tends to get you executed, so do try to get along. In some missions, reinforcements will arrive for one or both sides. Again, you have no say in who shows up or where they show up. However, the same reinforcements will always show up in the same location for a particular mission, so upon playing a mission for a second time, you can strategize around their impending arrival. Another strange quirk of the game is the restrictions on movement that pop up from time to time. Complete rules on exactly how each unit moves or cannot move would have been appreciated, in addition to the highlighted hexes telling you where you can go at any moment. The same can be said for ranged combat, particularly lines of fire and range for artillery. Each mission can be played at 3 different difficulty settings, and in an odd touch for this type of game, after the success or failure of a mission you are given a score. These features are obviously both included to encourage replayability, but exactly how your points are determined is not explained anywhere that I could find. It should also be noted that in keeping true to the name of the game, units that are flayed alive by an artillery barrage or are in some other way eviscerated recoil a bit, say ugh, and then retain their perfect posture. Upon dying, they genteelly lie down and then calmly fade away into nothingness so as not to get blood on other soldiers' shoes. And that, above anything else, makes this a truly civil war.
And now, Captain's judgment, ya scurvy dogs.
To misquote Abraham Lincoln, I find myself to be a house divided on Civil War 1863. On the one hand, I find it to be a rather slow and plodding game. The majority of your troops literally walk across the battlefield with all the animated urgency of a trip to the couch for an afternoon nap. The inability to choose your own units and the nonchalant way they go about being horrifically wounded makes it difficult to have any sort of intellectual or emotional investment in their well-being. Put that all together and you've got a lackadaisical game that you could care less about. But, on the other hand, a slow-paced game that frees you from the burdens of preparatory decision-making and the emotional strains of sending fine young men to war may be just the thing for lounging on the veranda on a hot summer's day with a cool mint julep in your hand. I think I'll keep Civil War 1863 in much the same way I keep old Charlie Daniels albums, to be brought out 2 or 3 times a year for very specific purposes and then hidden away and never to be mentioned again in polite company.
You've just been keelhauled by another Captain Bob review. For more reviews of iOS board and card games, set sail for iPadBoardGames.org.